Hey everyone, welcome back to Horror Heals. I'm Kendall, and this is the big one. This is the season 2 premiere. If you've been with us since the beginning, you know what we're all about. We explore how horror, the stuff that scares people, actually helps us process real life. Anxiety, grief, trauma, identity, all the things we don't always know how to talk about. And today's guest fits that mission perfectly. We're joined by Kamaria Williams, actor, writer, filmmaker, and founder of Moonshine Entertainment. Her work lives in that space between dark, surreal, and deeply human. She's not just telling scary stories. She's asking difficult questions about identity, fear, and what it means to move through the world in your own skin. Her short film, Haunted, takes something as everyday as driving and turns it into a moral and psychological horror story layered with real-world fear and lived experience. And what I love about this conversation is that Kamaria doesn't just talk about horror as entertainment, she talks about horror as survival, as processing, as a way to face things that might otherwise feel too overwhelming. So if you've ever used horror to cope, to feel seen, or even to just feel something when things get heavy, you're going to connect with this one. Let's get into it. You've been with us since the beginning. You know what we're all about.
Kamaria, thank you for joining us on the Horror Heals podcast.
Thank you for having me.
You described your work as dark and surreal. What drew you into horror as your storytelling medium?
I have been listening and watching and really taking in horror content my whole life. I am one of 5 kids. I am the only son. So I have 4 brothers. So they have been watching horror their whole life. I'm the middle child, so my older brothers would watch it, and my mom will also watch it. So then I was always introduced to horror. Like, I remember watching Species. I remember watching Nightmare on Elm Street and Jason films. I feel like a lot of slasher films were really popular in the 90s when I was growing up. I just kept watching them, and I loved them. So it just came natural to me. So as I got older, I just became more of a horror fan, along with listening to rock and more dark theme music. I grew up in New York City, and that's still one of my homes. So I've seen a lot of dark stuff at a young age.
Yeah.
So I feel like horror was always an interesting topic to me. I feel like it's a great way to see life through a different lens and see life through a real lens. Because I think it's the only genre that actually says something about society. George A. Romero's Day of the Dead and Dawn of the Dead. And them being stuck in the mall, I believe it was Dawn of the Dead. And he spoke about how consumerism is taking over America and how disgusting is that it is. And how also these people are like zombies because they are going back to what they remembered when they was alive. So I always thought that was interesting. And I think that's what kind of drew me in that's how I kind of see life too, with these movies, even though people think it's kind of lowbrow, but I think it's actually quite dark and deepening. And then many different ways you can look at life in general. So that's why I always watched it. And I've always watched it, I don't know, just always been drawn to me. And I don't really, I'm not really easily scared because, I've seen dead bodies as a kid and I've seen a lot of drug use and a lot of dark things around New York, and as much as your parents try to shield you from it, it's literally almost virtually impossible.
So the theme of our show is horror being good for our mental wellness. What do you think about that? The theme of our show is that we believe horror is good for our mental wellness. What do you think about our theme?
I love it. I was listening to one of your previous interviews about suicide and mental health, and I think it's amazing because that's how I heal. I use horror to heal. I didn't realize until I took a psychology class in undergrad, and a lot of the times they discuss how we process grief is through entertainment, is through reading books and such. So horror being my vehicle, I always wondered why. Like, I think someone said that is how horror is a great genre to process grief and to process things that we're afraid to think about, death, which is eminent for all of us. And it doesn't always have to be a somber, sad way. That's why I go with like dramas, like straight dramas, because they just seem, this is so arduous and so emotionally taxing to watch this person die of cancer. But if you watch it in the horror sense, there's interesting ways you can go about it. And there's so many subgenres. And when I would sad and depressed, or if I felt alone in school, if I felt like an outsider, I would literally watch movies like what Drag Me to Hell. And I would watch The Exorcist. I know. And The Exorcist I find is a really fun film. My mom is Catholic and she always is flabbergasted and gobsmacked that I laugh at The Exorcist. But I think it's actually it's a great character study, but also it was really hilarious if you think about it. Especially when Pizzazzu, I think, when she was possessed by Pizzazzu, Raven's character was yelling, and when the priest came in, you just like ignored it. You're like, yeah, I know. We're cool. Me and this demon, we're good. And I always felt it was fun to just kind of make light of situations without it being so, I guess, again, like I said, emotionally taxing where arduous feeling, I think it could also be, light. There's horror comedies, there's horror dramas, there's horror suspense. And I always see life as like, there's always something could happen around the corner. You know what I mean? Something could always happen. So I don't feel that is a terrible thing to watch it on screen. Actually, I think it makes me feel more comfortable. I'm like, oh, now I'm going to imagine every horrible thing that could happen. And I'm watching it unfold, or I'm writing it, or I'm reading it. And now I actually I fear less going out into the world in a weird way.
No, I get it.
So
what's the inspiration behind your film Haunted?
So for Haunted, I started driving in my 30s because growing up in New York, you didn't have to drive. So right. I got my license and I'm living in LA and I'm so afraid. So I'm so scared of driving, to be honest with you. I'm still relatively a new driver, but I always fear, and I'm fearing really terrible things that could happen that can ultimately result in death. It's a common thing that you've probably seen in movies where someone hits someone with a car, but I always wanted to give a new perspective from my unique perspective, being a Black non-binary femme who's a part of a demographic that's also susceptible to police brutality and abuse, which I have been stopped and profiled by police many times in New York and in LA. So I've always feared, like, okay, something bad happens if I'm a new driver and I F up, but then how am I going to respond? Do I call the police? Because now, even if I'm innocent or if I made a mistake and that could have resulted in an injury or death, I'm still going to be culpable because of my skin tone and how I look. Doesn't matter where I went to school, doesn't matter my background. It's just on a shirt. So I always get afraid, like, oh, what do I do? It's kind of like a moral conundrum. So I always wanted to bring a new perspective in that way. Of course, always do the right thing. But I guess the main character contemplating what to do kind of stems from that fear of, if I'm being honest, I made this mistake and I hit this person. How's it going to look on me? And am I going to recover? Should I say something? Who do I call? I can't call the police. So do I call a trusty friend? Is my friend going to understand? And yeah, so I thought it's a dark thought, which is why I love horror as a genre to explore. It doesn't make the person's actions correct. It's just a way to kind of question, or a philosophical question of, what do I do? And how would you deal with this? Because most people go, I want to call the cops. Like, okay, well, are you part of a demographic that's susceptible to abuse? Have you immigrated here? Are you afraid of ICE? You have a lot of ICE raids happening in Los Angeles. So it's so many things that play here, so many layers. And I think, yeah, that's why I did it. It's my personal fear of driving. I'm just like, oh my God, I'm so scared. But yeah.
So what kind of feedback have you gotten after people see the ending of the film and that has kind of surprised you?
I kind of wanted to focus more on the story and the natural horror or suspenseful elements that are already there. I've gotten good feedback that they didn't realize that it was shot in 1 or 2 locations. Some people at their film festivals were like, hey, it did take me after a while to realize, oh, wow, you shot it in kind of like in one location. And I'm like, yep, in one day. Yeah, just to trim down the cost, because I had to hire a production company, who's amazing, by the way. And as well as the director, Shamika Wright, she's amazing too. And she worked with me. She's also a Black femme from East Coast. And we talked a lot about culture and history. And it was just such a beautiful, inviting set, with a diverse cast who was so happy to be a part of everything as well. So I was kind of shocked by that, because I was always afraid of, okay, here's my story. You don't want to work with me? And we also changed a lot of things too, based on how we felt on set. And there was mishaps. There was a mishap of, oh, we had to cut some stuff down or we weren't able to shoot at some locations. And some people were like, honestly, you didn't really need it because it probably would have taken away from the story. And that's what I always try to focus on is story. As an actor and writer and creator, I'm always trying to focus on, okay, what is the story? And how can people connect to the story? Yeah.
I think we're starting to see realistic depictions of people of color and queer people in horror. Why is horror such a powerful space for those types of stories?
I love this question so much. Oh my goodness. I watched a documentary called Horror Noir on AMC Plus / Shudder channel.
Yep.
And yeah, sure, you'll both watch it. I love that documentary. And I guess growing up, I've always watched like Black horror films or films that had darker elements like Vampire in Brooklyn, as well as Bones and Tales from the Hood. But I always felt that it wasn't enough representation. I think one of the early survivors I remember, there's a few, but Demon Knight was Jada Pinkett Smith. And I was happy she survived because I thought she was going to die. I went, oh, crazy girl, you better be gone. But she actually survived. I was like, okay. And she's a Black woman, so I was very happy to see that. But I think a lot of American history is quite dark. And we are a part of that as BIPOC people, Black, Indigenous people, people of color. And sometimes those stories get swept away. I'm happy that there is a resurgence, and I think it's because there's a genre that was uncharted. I do think that there was some apprehension when I was younger with a lot of Black creatives delving into horror because of Christianity. Christianity is really big in our culture due to enslavement. It's always those demonic allegations. I have a lot of Christian family members, and some of them shy away from horror because they just view it as demonic overall. But there's a lot of different layers you can bring into with a lot of trauma and grief. And there's, nothing more traumatic than dealing with racism and misogyny and homophobia. So I'm really happy to see that a lot of us who are from diverse backgrounds are using horror as a genre. And I think it's increasing with Sinners and Get Out, Master, Nanny, and Black Boxes. There's so many now. I think it's because now creatives are starting to see the value in horror, especially with Get Out. That was a big juggernaut. They made a lot of money. Man, so they're like, okay, one of my version of Get Out. Now we have 13 Get Outs. But hey, it's a great starting point. Even I was rewatching them season 2, and a lot happening in that show. It's a great show, fantastic acting. I couldn't believe how amazing it is. But I'm just happy that people from my background is not afraid of exploring this anymore, and that no Abrahamic religion or Christianity is holding people back. So I think that stigma of calling horror demonic or scary or I don't want to think about it because it could happen is starting to go away. And I think more other communities are also feeling comfortable exploring that genre. I love South and all South Asian horror. I love Japanese horror. I love French horror. But now I saw like a Nigerian horror film for the first time. I said, hey, okay. So it's really, really interesting to see people feeling comfortable with it and not being a weird stigma or not seeing it as lowbrow or not seeing it as anything that is less than a creative outlet.
Why do you think that horror fans are more open to stories about queer people and people of color?
Yeah, that's a great question. I think that as queer people, we're just getting more representation. I think that people always felt we had, but that's not necessarily true. I think people just see Will and Grace and go, ha, there we go. There's all the queer. And on now, first of all, those are two cisgendered gay men living in New York City, in the Upper West Side. I'm at Upper East Side. And that's not enough to give representation to the whole LGBTQIA plus community. So I think people are there's different perspectives. I think it's just a fresh perspective. I think we're tired of hearing the same old stories. And okay, there's a beautiful white family that moves into a white picket fence house in middle America, and this strange things happens. This house, the horror, there's like Insidious, there's like 1,000 of those stories. So now I think people, even if it's that same premise, I think people are not interested in saying, what happens if it's two moms, or if it's like one trans person, or if it's just a single person living by themselves? Now, how would that happen? How would this unfold? Because now we're peering into somebody's background culture and the intersectionality of where they live in our society. And it's not just the same bland story over and over again. And, we already have 70s, 80s, like 1,000 of those films. You can go on Tubi right now and watch, it's all them the same premise. I love those movies, by the way. I love B-horror films. But I think it's also great to go, well, what's a different aspect about queer community? America, we watch a lot of true crime. And true crime is the one. A lot of true crime. So the correlation to watching, if you watch true crime and don't watch horror, I always wonder what that is. Like, how are you comfortable hearing about a family being butchered, but in real life, but you're afraid to watch it on screen? I'm so confused about that. In narrative, fiction sense. So I think, as Americans, we're quite, I guess, invested and interested in macabre. A lot of things, a lot of horror, I guess, events, a lot of horror, all these different events popping up. And I think people are really interested in this stuff. So now people are asking, okay, what else? What else can we explore that we haven't explored before? Is there another demographic that's unturned? Is there a new perspective? And people are always asking, oh, we're tired of the remakes. Okay, then support the new stuff. I'm quite actually happy that they are. There's a lot of Sinners and amazing, and a lot of films are starting to do really well with it being an original in a horror story, or people are still watching Jordan Peele stuff. People are now waiting for his next stuff. People are excited for Scary Movie 6. And people are like, oh, yeah, I can't wait for this film to come out. I miss it because it's a parody of all these other films that we're seeing. And it's another layer of life that we get to laugh at. Because also, if you laugh at horror, it won't seem as serious or scary. Because like my girlfriends say, like, oh, after a scary horror movie, I'm going to watch a cartoon.
Right.
Great. So as an actor, writer, and filmmaker, how did those different roles inform your storytelling?
I went to New York University to School of the Arts, so I got my degree in drama and theater. I'm also a classically trained actor. So at the beginning of my career, I didn't really get to do too much horror. I submitted for a lot. I had a lot of auditions, but I haven't gotten picked for horror as an actor, truth be told. So I had to focus on writing it and reading it. Like Jordan Peele said, write the story you want to see. I did a lot of Shakespeare and then did a lot of like classical texts. Like, was it George Bernard Shaw and Oscar Wilde, Shakespeare, Moliere, all those guys. But I also saw like when I was reading these things, maybe because, especially Shakespeare's dramas and tragedies, they're so effing dark. Goodness gracious. The way that people died, why they died, how they died is so interesting from, Julius Caesar to Macbeth. So I always found, even though have horror elements, it just didn't have that charm at that time. But that's how I try to conceptualize acting, because sometimes you can get not bored. You have your dream roles that you really want to play. You really want to be the titular character of a story, or like the heroine of a triumphant of a horror story. That's what I want to play, at least. And I don't always see cast in those roles. So in my mind, when I use my imagination to play these roles, I use those elements. And that's what kind of excites me as an actor, even though that's not what's playing out for street, or maybe the tone at least, or the tonality, or the way it's directed. So for writing, I just say, you know what? I'm going to write horror because I read horror. I'm reading 10 of You Do right now. I'm reading also Out There Screaming. It's edited by Jordan Peele. So I'm like, okay, how can I make a version that I want to see? What do I want to see on screen, actually? So I have 4 or 5 scripts pending. You know how you write something and you just go, I have another idea. I'm going to write that too. I have another idea. Let me write it down before someone thinks of it, or let me write it down before I forget. And then you just dissipates into ether. So I kind of just decided to write it. And I had a lot of fun writing horror. I wrote a drama to someone's biography, but I had a lot of fun writing horror. I think it just comes really naturally to me because it's something I've consumed my whole life. I think out of everything I've read and watched and read, I think the most, suspense, horror, mystery, dramas are like the most I've ever consumed, besides like comedy shows. I just said, let me just write it. That's what I want to see. That's what I want to create. And let me also work with other creatives who are interested in exploring that genre too. Diverse creators. And they were down. And some of them are like, it's horror, but I love to write it. And I go, girl, no. But sometimes people go, when I write something, but it scares me. And I go, it must be good. Because I think Stephen King even said, there are times when he was writing The Shining and he got spooked. And I love The Shining. Oh my God, one of my favorites the whole time. So I was like, yeah, you know what? That's a good indication that is actually probably a good script or something that resonates with other people, if it resonates with you.
So if your life were a horror movie, what genre would it be?
Ooh, yes, I love this question. I would say horror. Okay, a little bit of traumatic horror, like traumatic Black horror, but with comedy.
Cool.
Like, I love Trick or Treat, but that's in my head. I like the aesthetic of Trick or Treat, even though I didn't grow up in a small town. Some psychological elements and Get Out, kind of like all of those layered in. Yeah.
So the final question that we always ask on the podcast is, who is your favorite final person, the survivor in a horror movie?
Now, how would you laugh at that? That is a hard question. Here's a controversial take. It's hard to have one because, one, there's so many good final people. But two, I don't always want the person to survive. I like when villains win. That's why we love the Joker or Dark Knight. No shade to Christopher Nolan, fantastic director, but the Joker and Heath Ledger's performance to me made the Dark Knight. Again, it's not horror, but it's kind of dark themed, and I'm obsessed with that. I read the comics as a kid. I have the comics, so I read the book. I have the book as well. So, but just his acting and his in tandem with Christopher Nolan's direction is just amazing. And technically, in the end, he did win. He was supposed to be in Dark Knight Rises. However, of course, we know that Heath Ledger is now unfortunately no longer with us. But had he not died, he would have definitely been in part 3. And that's why I love The Dark Knight. And I think a lot of people like the Infinity War too from Avengers because they lose. But out of, I guess the people who actually survive, I don't know. I guess I go with Raven from The Exorcist. I'm happy that she survived that. The Exorcist suit, the heretic was questionable, but I'm very happy that she survived. And I think it's hard for me to answer that because I think I really do like when the villains win. I am happy that Jada Pinkett didn't make it to the end of Demon Knight because it was I go lie to you, was not a good girl. But I'm really happy that she survived that. For my earliest memories, that's what I remember. Oh, I do love, and then season 1, of course, I'm happy with the mother played by the amazing Deborah Ayadi. She's fantastic. And of course, I wanted the family to survive, but yeah. Oh, and then us. Lupita survived as well. Oh, questionable. I think it was probably her tether, but I'm happy that Lupita, at the ending moment of Us, my favorite, I could be playing it because the son looks at her. She's, yeah, I know, I see you. And they have that moment in the car and they pans out to see all of the tetherers coming out from the underground. And I thought that was amazing. And I think the son also got taken as well. So it was a cool moment, like a non-verbal moment between both actors.
Yeah, I know those are great answers. And I know we had a guest who said her favorite was Samara from The Ring. So that's definitely not a hero.
Because Samara is a victim. And that's another thing I wanted to add to. A lot of the time, these characters be victims, not villains.
Very true.
Especially when was that a Bloody Mary, prom night, Bloody Mary Lou or something. I was like, girl, get them all. Carrie also was a victim too. You know what I mean? I didn't see these people as villains. So I wish Carrie would have lived. I'm so mad that she died. Oh my gosh. I was screaming at the screen as a kid. I thought, are you kidding me?
We'll see what happens. There's a new series that's going to be coming out with that we're retelling the Carrie story.
Yeah, I'm so excited.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much for taking some time to share your perspective with us. It's so important to hear different voices.
Thank you for having me. It's so fun.
Kamaria, thank you so much for joining us. This was such a thoughtful conversation. What really stayed with me is how you describe horror not just as something you watch, but as something you use. A way to process fear, grief, identity, and all the complicated layers of real life. That idea that imagining the worst can actually make the real world feel a little less overwhelming. That's kind of the heart of what we do here. And I also love that you're pushing horror forward, telling stories that don't always get told, bringing in new perspectives, and showing that horror isn't one thing. It's a space where all kinds of voices can exist and be heard. And I've got to say this, because no one else has done this on the show before. After we wrapped, Kamaria actually sent us additional audio with more thoughts on Final People. That level of care and thoughtfulness, going back and continuing the conversation even after we hit stop, it really means a lot. So thank you for that. To everyone listening, if this episode resonated with you, share it with someone who gets it. someone who understands that horror isn't just about being scared, it's about feeling seen. And remember, horror is good for mental wellness? Of course it is. The Horror Heals podcast is produced and presented by Mosaic Multimedia, LLC.